Clean this up, janitor. The new intern snapped at me in the elevator. I wiped the coffee. Hours later, I walked onstage for the all-hands. She was in the front row. I tapped the mic. Welcome. I am the founder, and I have one announcement about our internship program. The memory was still a phantom weight in my hand, the ghost of a mop handle. It was the reason I was here now, trading my tailored suit for a stiff, scratchy jumpsuit the color of industrial soap. I was Philip, the 55-year-old founder and CEO of Genesis Solutions. But today I was Pat, a maintenance worker. The decision to go undercover hadn't been made lightly, but the reports from the last 6 months were chilling a sudden, aggressive shift in company culture. Whispers of arrogant young hires treating support staff as personal servants, and a general air of toxicity replacing the collaborative grid I had built the company on. I pinned the name tag Pat over the left breast pocket. It was crooked, and the uniform smelled faintly of other people's sweat and cheap lemon disinfectant. This was not the sleek, climate-controlled world of the penthouse I was accustomed to. As I looked in the utility closet mirror, I barely recognized myself. My meticulously styled silver hair was hidden beneath a baseball cap, and my usual impeccably polished leather loafers were replaced by thick, rubber-soled safety boots. The transformation was complete, and with it came a strange, unwelcome sense of fear. Leaving the executive washroom and walking down the corridor was like stepping into an alternate reality. I knew the exact shade of the carpet, the precise angle of the modern art installation in the lobby, but no one saw me. Executives who would have deferred to me 5 seconds ago now brushed past without a glance. My stoicism, which was my hallmark in the boardroom, felt useless now. It was not a cloak of authority. It was a cheap, gray polyester invisibility suit. My first task was sweeping a fire escape stairwell, a mundane chore that felt absurdly beneath me, yet necessary to maintain my cover. I remembered the internal conflict that brought me here, the feeling of irrelevance. I had successfully detached from the day-to-day operations to focus on long-term strategy, only to find that my absence had created a vacuum filled by aggressive, self-serving ambition. My fear wasn't of losing the company's value, but of losing its soul. I struggled with the cynical thought that perhaps all ambition, no matter how carefully nurtured, devolved into this toxic mess. I dragged a squeaky yellow mop bucket toward the main executive floor, moving with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who belonged to the background noise. My internal conflict, feeling irrelevant, intensified as I realized just how thoroughly the staff had adapted to ignoring their surroundings. The fluorescent lights hummed, and the expensive air conditioning system I had personally approved vented cool air onto my face, but I was sweating. It was the sweat of discomfort, of fear that I might lose my temper, and above all, of profound isolation. I paused by the elevators, waiting for the first wave of morning arrivals. I felt a surge of pure, quiet rage. The physical act of carrying the heavy bucket, of wiping a sticky handprint off a doorframe, was a brutal reminder of the labor that kept this gleaming tower standing, labor that was apparently treated with contempt. It was in this moment of quiet, simmering anger that the first real test arrived. I was leaning against the service door, trying to look appropriately bored, when the executive elevator doors opened on the 35th floor. Miles Albright, the very intern whose recent conduct reports had first raised my alarm, strode out, accompanied by 2 nervous-looking junior analysts. Miles had that clean-cut, aggressive confidence that always felt entirely unearned. He was talking loudly on his phone, oblivious to the fact that the man with the mop bucket was the man who signed his paycheck, radiating an obnoxious, unearned superiority. I followed them toward the office bullpen, focusing on my breathing to keep my facade intact. Philip, the CEO, would have offered a greeting, perhaps a stern, quiet word about professional conduct. Pat, the maintenance worker, simply kept his head down, pushing the squeaky cart. I was here to watch, to gather, and to confirm the cynicism that had driven me to this disguise. The culture was sick, and I was about to confirm whether the disease was curable, or if I needed to perform an excision. I had left the Georgetown brownstone and the boardroom for this, seeking not self-discovery, but cold, hard evidence, and I was determined to cut out the disease, no matter how much the cynicism hurt. Cut out the disease, no matter how much the cynicism hurt. I followed the arrogant young intern, Miles Albright, down the corridor, the squeak of my utility cart, a small, shameful drumbeat accompanying his important, booming voice. We reached the 45th floor, the hub of the summer internship program and where Miles held court. He paused near the elevator bank, still pontificating to his analysts about disruptive optics and leveraging synergy. He was so focused on projecting unearned confidence, he failed to notice the massive, venti-sized smoothie cup he was holding tilting dangerously in his hand as he gestured wildly to emphasize a point about corporate dominance. Physics, as I knew from designing this very building, was a harsh mistress. As Miles made a sweeping, theatrical turn intended to showcase his Italian leather loafers, the cup lid gave way. The thick purple contents, a noxious mix of blueberry and acai, I guessed, didn't just spill. It erupted. It coated the pristine stainless steel railing, ran down the polished glass of the panoramic window, and pooled instantly on the slate floor. By a near miracle, the expensive suit remained unstained, but a large, sticky splash landed directly on the toe of my worn safety boot and the wheel of my mop bucket. Silence fell, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the drip of purple sludge sliding down the window pane. My first instinct, the one honed by 20 years of ultimate authority, was to snap, to demand an apology, to remind him that he was standing in a building I financed, founded, and built. But I was Pat, the janitor. I stood perfectly still, my jaw clenched so tightly I could hear a faint grinding sound. Miles slowly turned back from surveying the mess. He wasn't apologetic, he was deeply inconvenienced. He sighed, a dramatic exhalation that carried the weight of someone whose life had been personally assaulted by a badly made drink. Badly made drink. He checked his watch, then his reflection in the glass, and finally, his gaze settled on me. It wasn't a look of recognition, or even awareness. It was the detached, bored gaze one gives to furniture, or a poorly functioning appliance. He looked directly at the space above my left shoulder, then down at the purple pool spreading on the floor. God, what a disaster, he muttered, as if this were an insurmountable catastrophe. Then, he looked slightly lower, focusing on the cheap name tag on my chest. Hey, Pat. His voice was flat, devoid of anger or respect. It was the tone reserved for giving simple, unquestionable commands to the help. He spoke again slowly, deliberately, as though instructing a child or someone incapable of higher thought. Clean this mess up, janitor. I need this floor spotless before the vice president gets up here for the noon meeting. It looks unprofessional. My grip on the mop handle tightened until the wood threatened to splinter. Clean this up, janitor. The words were a direct assault on the integrity I had spent a lifetime defending. Philip, the founder, wanted to peel the skin off his ego with a few well-chosen sentences. But Pat, the maintenance worker, knew the mission was more important than a momentary victory. A memory flashed the moment I decided to start Genesis Solutions, pouring my life savings into a rickety Tacoma warehouse, promising myself that every person who contributed to the company would be treated with respect. This entitled child was the antithesis of that promise. I took a deep, shaky breath, forcing the fire in my eyes to die down to a dull, subservient ember. I slumped my posture slightly, adopting the air of defeat Miles expected. This was the test. If I broke character, I learned nothing, and the rot would continue. Yes, sir, I mumbled, keeping my head down, making sure my voice was barely audible. Miles didn't acknowledge the response. He simply stepped cleanly over the edge of the expanding puddle and walked away, his two nervous analysts trailing him. I watched the purple mess drip, looking like a fresh, viscous wound on the company floor. I knelt, pulled a towel from my belt, and began wiping the sickeningly sweet spill. It was scalded and sticky, but as I wrung the rag out with a violent, satisfying twist, a shift occurred inside me. The anger wasn't suppressed, it was transformed into a cold, clinical determination. The initial shock of invisibility was gone, replaced by a grim confirmation. Miles Albright wasn't just arrogant. He was the precise strain of corporate toxicity I needed to eliminate. The conflict was no longer abstract, it was specific, and it smelled like burnt acai and expensive disdain. The mission was validated, and I had my target. The sticky residue of the purple smoothie was gone, but the incident had served its purpose. It was not just an insult, it was a rallying cry. From that moment, my rage transformed into a cold, focused determination to systematically gather the rot plaguing Genesis Solutions. My gray jumpsuit became my invisibility cloak. I was furniture, a texture in the background. My new life as Pat involved spending mornings emptying recycling bins that contained the detritus of expensive takeout and frantic, stressed-out energy, and my afternoons polishing the glass walls of conference rooms. The irony was thick. The walls I was tasked with cleaning offered a front row seat to the ethical erosion of the company I created. I quickly found that the most confidential conversations were held in the open, because the participants genuinely believed no one important was listening. I overheard a director named Chad plotting unfair layoffs for the older, higher-paid engineers, disguising the cuts as restructuring for digital optimization. I scrubbed the whiteboard 10 feet away, documenting every name and every code phrase in my memory. Miles Albright was a master of this toxic environment, a predator who used his position, however junior, to exert dominance. One Tuesday, while I was supposedly fixing a slow drain in the communal kitchenette, I witnessed him corner Sarah Chen, a brilliant but soft-spoken senior engineer on the DevOps team. Sarah represented the kind of focused talent Genesis Solutions was built to attract. "Miles, I am telling you, the data migration framework isn't stable," Sarah said, her voice thin with anxiety. "If we push the deployment on Friday, we risk a minimum of 4% data loss. We need another week to stress test the back end." Miles leaned against the expensive espresso machine, scrolling through his phone with theatrical boredom. Sarah, you're thinking like an engineer. The client doesn't care about back-end stability, they care about delivery. I promised Vice President Harrison we'd hit the Friday deadline. If we delay, we look weak. But it's my code," Sarah pleaded, clutching a tablet. "I can't sign off on a rollout that gambles with thousands of user accounts. That's reckless." The low hum of the espresso machine stopped. The silence became cold. Miles finally looked up, his expression shifting from boredom to menace. "You don't have to sign off, buddy. I already told Harrison the code is ready. But I should warn you, I heard Human Resources is quietly looking to trim headcount in engineering next month. It would be a shame for you to look like you're not a team player right before the review." I froze under the sink, my hand hovering over a wrench. This wasn't just arrogance, this was corporate blackmail. Miles was actively leveraging Sarah's job security against the company's structural integrity, all to inflate his own perceived competency. It was the purest form of the rot. Sarah eventually whispered, defeated, "Okay, Miles, I'll patch it as best I can." The physical toll of my work provided a strange counterpoint to the psychic damage of these observations. My back ached in ways it hadn't since my first start-up days, and my hands were rough and cracked from the industrial soap. But the pain was grounding, reminding me I was working for a principle, not for prestige. It fueled my determination. That night, back in my temporary apartment, a sterile place chosen for its anonymity, I didn't use a laptop or a secure server. I used a cheap spiral-bound notebook and a pen. My original idea of auditing balance sheets was laughably naive. The rot wasn't in the numbers, it was in the human interactions. I began my list. 1. Miles Albright, systematically undermining technical peers. Blackmail Sarah Chen incident. 2. Chad Harrison, planning layoffs based on age's salary cost cutting, not performance. 3. Marketing team mocking the disabled cleaning staff within earshot. The list grew daily. The core of my struggle, my fear of irrelevance, was slowly giving way to a fierce, protective instinct. I was relevant because I was the only one seeing this. Using a discarded contractor's master key, I gained access to the server room after hours. The air was cool and dry, smelling of ozone and high-functioning machines. Security cameras were focused on the racks, not the cleaning staff. I sat at a terminal, my fingers, usually stiff from wringing out rags, flying across the keyboard. Pat the janitor had master keys, but Philip the architect still held the administrator credentials. I accessed the private repository. I found Miles's project files and the actual code commits. They confirmed everything Sarah had said. The project was compromised. I then accessed the Human Resources database, the one they thought was impenetrable, and pulled the internal complaint logs, finding a muffled report that corroborated Miles's sycophantic behavior toward Vice President Harrison. I copied everything, the code evidence, the complaint log data, and the specific names Miles had flagged for potential trimming, to a deeply encrypted cloud drive. As the progress bar filled, I stared at the blinking terminal lights. The physical job was merely a mask. My purpose was to gather the weapons I needed to fight the sickness. I had the code, I had the testimony, and I had the absolute, unwavering determination to dismantle the toxic culture I had inadvertently fostered. I now held the evidence to prove that this was not just arrogance, but criminal sabotage. The code commits and HR logs were safely stored, providing the structural evidence of the rot. But the final, most visceral piece of the puzzle was missing, an undeniable, personal act of petty cruelty that would resonate far beyond any boardroom memo. I found myself near the break room late one afternoon, changing the heavy liner of the communal waste bin. The scent of stale food and discarded ambition hung in the air. Miles walked in, flanked by 2 junior associates, their laughter loud and grating, signaling the pack mentality of unearned success. They were recounting a story, likely another tale of Miles using his limited authority to humiliate a subordinate. When he spotted me, I was bent over, wrestling the overfilled bag my gray uniform straining. To him I was not an individual, I was a prop, an opportunity for performance. "Watch this," Miles whispered to his associates, his voice carrying just enough for me to hear. He was holding a half-eaten, sticky powdered sugar pastry, a jelly-filled confection that was a disaster waiting to happen. He sauntered over to the trash receptacle, stopping directly behind me. "Whoops," he drawled, his voice saturated with fake surprise. He did not aim for the bin. He dropped the messy pastry directly onto the back of my head. The powdered sugar puffed out in a white cloud, dusting my cap and shoulders. The sticky jelly smeared against the nape of my neck and soaked instantly into the collar of the gray uniform. I froze. The physical impact was negligible, but the sheer calculated indignity of the action was staggering. It was not an accident, it was a deliberate, public statement of his contempt for my role, for my existence. Miles erupted in practiced, loud false concern.
"Oh, my bad, Pat. Slipped right out of my hand.
Gravity, right? It's a killer." The junior associates snickered, hiding their amused faces behind their hands. Slowly, carefully, I straightened up and turned to face him. The jelly was warm and sticky, sliding down my neck. I looked Miles Albright directly in the eye. I didn't see the intern who worked for me. I saw the embodiment of the disrespect that was devouring my company. My voice was low, raspier than usual from forcing myself into the subservient tone of Pat for weeks. "You did that on purpose, sir." Miles's smirk hardened. For a fleeting microsecond, he may have registered the fire in my eyes, but he quickly dismissed it, stepping closer into my personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and the internal decay of his character. "Excuse me," he said, dropping his voice to a menacing whisper that was far more sinister than his earlier shouts. "I think you are confused. Accidents happen, just like it would be an accident if human resources received a report about a facilities worker with a bad attitude. I hear the contracting agency has a zero-tolerance policy for rudeness. You need this job, don't you, Pat?" He gestured dismissively toward the floor, where some powdered sugar had fallen. "Clean it up, and don't talk to me unless I pay you to. You're here to serve, not to speak." He turned on his heel and walked out, his laughter echoing down the hallway. His goons followed, casting pitying, amused glances back at the man covered in jelly and powdered sugar. I stood there, shaking, not with fear, but with a crystallized, perfect rage. The anger was no longer a suppressed internal conflict, it was an active chemical burn. He had forced me to wear the indignity like a crown. I walked to the utility sink and scrubbed the sticky mess out of my hair and off my neck, the industrial soap stinging my raw skin. I looked at the reflection in the chrome faucet, wet hair, red eyes, the gray jumpsuit stained. The time for observation was over. This specific act of malice was the final, undeniable proof I needed. I no longer just had corporate evidence, I had moral certainty. I had suffered the final, total insult. Miles wanted me to be background noise. Fine. I would be the seismic event that brought his world down. I was ready to move the entire operation into the final, aggressive phase. The sticky mess of the pastry was wiped away, but the humiliation remained, transformed into a cold catalyst. My time as Pat the maintenance worker was over. The game had shifted from observation to execution, from passive resistance to active, strategic engagement. My first act was securing the evidence. I returned to the break room, utilizing my contractor's master key to discreetly access the cabinet where I knew the security camera footage was routed. Though the high-level security was controlled centrally, the local feeds often contained buffers. I pulled the specific video file, Miles dropping the donut, and copied it, encrypting it instantly. This visceral, undeniable act of petty cruelty was the public weapon I needed. I compiled all the proof: the encrypted video clip, the code analysis showing Miles's forced buggy commit, the HR complaint logs, and the names Miles and Chad had listed for trimming. I named the master file the cleansing. The quiet determination I felt was the most powerful emotion I had experienced since the day I rang the opening bell at the stock exchange 10 years ago. I was shedding the vulnerability of Pat and stepping back into the calculated, authoritative power of Philip, the founder. It was time to contact the outside world. I retreated to the deserted parking garage stairwell and pulled out a small, prepaid burner phone I had purchased specifically for this mission. I dialed a number from memory, a sequence known only to 3 people. It was the direct line to a woman named Grace, my chief operations officer and a long-time, trusted partner I had personally mentored. Grace answered on the second ring, her voice tight with professional guardedness. "This line is unlisted. Identify yourself." My voice, accustomed to the low mumble of subservience, was forced into my authoritative register. It still sounded strained but commanding. "Grace, it's Philip. Do not ask where I am." There was a profound silence on the line, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Sir, where are you?" I said. "Don't ask. Listen carefully. I need you to initiate an emergency board meeting for Wednesday, 10 o'clock a.m., Grand Auditorium. Subject Q3 Strategic Pivot. Make the attendance mandatory for all full-time employees, directors, and contract staff. Frame it as a critical announcement." "Understood," Grace replied, her voice now crisp and focused, recognizing the command structure. "What is the critical update, sir?" "The launch of the new Q3 product update scheduled for Friday is a fraud. Miles Albright forced a corrupted code commit. You must isolate it. I need you to immediately set up a secure sandbox environment. Let the launch proceed on Friday, but make sure not a single byte of data reaches the live production server. I want Miles to believe he is minutes away from a victory that is already a simulation." "A ghost launch?" Grace breathed, understanding the trap. "Exactly. I want to see exactly what happens when his system is due to crash without risking Genesis Solutions' data or reputation. Then, prepare my office. Have my executive power suit delivered and pressed. This ends Wednesday." I hung up before she could ask another question. The phone went straight back into the incinerating heat of the engine block I had rigged to destroy the circuit board on command. Total security. Back in my sterile apartment, I laid out the clothes I had brought from my Georgetown brownstone, a dark navy bespoke suit with sharp, commanding shoulders. I looked at the gray uniform folded on the bed beside it. It was stained with dirt, coffee, and jelly, but it had bought me the truth. I sat at the wobbly kitchen table and pulled out a clean sheet of paper. I didn't need a teleprompter, but I needed to structure the moment of maximum impact. I wrote 3 bullet points: 1. Identity. 2. Integrity. 3. Eviction. I was no longer merely reporting on the rot, I was performing the surgery. The strategic calm I felt was absolute. I was done being Pat. I was ready to become Philip again, only this time, a Philip who knew exactly what the people in the shadows were doing. Wednesday morning arrived with a cool, sharp clarity. I was no longer Pat, the invisible man. I was Philip, the architect of this confrontation. The stage had been set, the trap laid, and all the key players, especially Miles, were walking directly into the spotlight. The company was a hive of nervous energy. The mandatory all-hands meeting, called by the office of the board, had caused immediate, widespread panic. Employees were frantically cleaning their desks and pretending to review spreadsheets, fearing a massive layoff announcement. Miles, however, was in his element. I observed him briefly from a shielded vantage point as I entered the building through a private entrance. He was strutting around the bullpen like a peacock, loudly informing a group of junior staff that this was likely the founder finally recognizing his aggressive growth strategy. "I'm going to pitch her my vision," I overheard him say. "She needs to know the old way is dead. She'll love me. Leaders recognize leaders." His arrogance was a self-inflating balloon, ready for a pinprick. He thought he was minutes away from victory, from watching his sabotage code launch and securing his promotion. I avoided the general flow of traffic and took a service elevator up to the staging suite behind the grand auditorium. The suit, navy blue, razor sharp, a shield of power, felt heavy yet right. I checked my appearance in the full-length mirror. The safety boots and gray polyester were gone. My hair was styled and my eyes, which had been dull with subservience for 4 weeks, now held the cold, determined fire of a man reclaiming his turf. 9:55 a.m. I slipped on a trench coat and sunglasses, securing the access badge that read Founder Philip. I needed to move from the staging suite to the wings without being seen by the stragglers still entering the main hall. As luck, or perhaps fate, would have it, the service elevator doors opened right onto the backstage waiting area just as the 3 men I wanted to see most, Miles Chad, the director who planned layoffs, and Vice President Harrison, were standing there, waiting for the VIP elevator to take them to the front row. They were laughing, so I told him. Chad was saying loudly, "If you want work-life balance, go work at the post office. This is Genesis." Miles spotted me, a tall figure in a heavy coat and shades emerging from the maintenance elevator. He didn't recognize me. He only saw an obstacle. "Excuses," Miles said, his tone instantly dismissive, barely pausing his conversation. He actually shouldered past me to press the VIP elevator button. "Staff entrance is that way, honey." "Who was that?" Harrison asked, glancing at me as I moved toward the heavy stage door. "Probably catering," Miles replied, instantly dismissing my existence. "Or maybe the founder's nurse. I heard he's frail." I paused, my hand hovering over the door handle. Frail. I turned my head slightly, catching Miles's profile one last time. He was preening, utterly convinced of his own untouchable status. I allowed myself a silent, cutting smile. "Enjoy the elevator ride, Miles," I thought. "It is the last time you are going up." I pushed through the heavy stage door. Mike, the stage manager, a veteran employee who had been with me since the early days, stood waiting. I took off the sunglasses and let the trench coat slide off my shoulders. Mike caught the coat, his eyes widening as he recognized the man in the navy suit. He saw the cold resolve in my gaze. "Welcome back, boss," he whispered, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Good to be back, Mike," I replied, my voice deep and clear, the CEO voice fully resurrected. "Is the mic hot?" "Hot and ready. Intro video is playing now." I looked out past the curtain. The giant screen was filled with historical footage. Young Philip in a garage, coding, the music swelling inspirationally. The 700 people in the auditorium, plus the 2,000 watching the internal live stream, were applauding politely, the applause of obligation. The video faded to black. A single spotlight slammed onto the center stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer boomed, "please welcome the founder of Genesis Solutions, Philip Hart." I took a deep, steadying breath, channeling every ounce of suppressed rage, every stolen code commit, and every powdered sugar humiliation into my posture. I stepped into the light. The sharp click of my 3-inch leather heels on the wooden stage was the only sound as I walked to the podium. The applause faltered. Confusion rippled across the crowd. I didn't smile. I gripped the edges of the podium with hands that were still slightly rough from weeks of scrubbing, and I stared dead at the front row. Miles Albright was there, central, perfectly situated next to Chad and Harrison. He was still clapping, a polite, bored expression fixed on his face. Then his eyes locked onto mine. I watched the neurons fire. Confusion first, then intense familiarity, and then the terrifying, complete realization. The height, the eyes, the hands, the same gravel in the voice he had ordered around for 4 weeks. His hands froze mid-clap. His mouth opened slightly. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked instantly gray. He was paralyzed. I leaned into the microphone. "Good morning," I said, my voice booming, authoritative, and terrifyingly calm. "It's been a while." I paused, letting the silence stretch, forcing Miles to confront the full weight of the scene. "For most of you, I've been a name on a plaque, a signature on a stock certificate, a portrait in the hallway, a ghost story." I continued, scanning the room. "But for some of you," and I locked my eyes squarely on Miles, "I've been much closer. I've been riding in the elevator with you. I've been cleaning your conference rooms. I've been picking up your trash." A collective, massive gasp went through the room. Miles sank slightly into his chair, trying desperately to dissolve into the upholstery. For the past month, I stated, the gravity of the words absolute. I have been working undercover as a member of the facilities team. I wore a gray jumpsuit, and I listened. I saw how you speak to each other when you think power isn't watching, and I saw what this culture has truly become. The strategic calm was absolute. I was the founder returned ready to clean house. The collective gasp from the 700 employees in the auditorium hung suspended in the air. Miles Albright remained frozen in the front row, a figure carved out of shame and terror. The silence was not confusion now, it was horrified, respectful anticipation. I leaned back into the microphone, my voice rising in measured intensity. I built Genesis Solutions on integrity and the idea that every single person in this building matters. But somewhere, we started mistaking cruelty for leadership and arrogance for competence. I pointed a precise finger toward the front row. I have observed managers systematically taking credit for their team's work. I have seen executives planning large-scale layoffs while claiming excessive travel expenses. And worst of all, my voice dropped to a terrifying steady calm. I saw an associate product manager, a young man we were meant to be mentoring, purposefully humiliate a facilities worker by throwing a powdered sugar pastry onto his head. I watched as the people immediately surrounding Miles physically recoiled, creating a widening circle of empty seats around him. His face was pure ash. He told that worker to clean it up. I continued, projecting the cold fury I had internalized for weeks. He told him he was here to serve, not to speak. He told him he was background noise. I straightened to my full height, the expensive Italian wool of the suit pulling taut across my shoulders. Well, I cleaned it up, and now I am going to clean house. Miles Albright, I commanded, the name echoing in the vast hall. Please stand up. He didn't move. He was shaking, utterly stripped of his corporate armor. A child called to the principal's office. Stand up. I repeated the word, a final, unquestionable order. Slowly, painfully, Miles rose. He looked like he might collapse. Vice President Harrison, sitting next to him, stared at Miles with a mixture of dawning realization and betrayal. You have a major software update scheduled to go live today, right now at noon, I stated. The Q3 migration that your senior engineer, Sarah Chen, specifically warned you would result in 4% irreversible data loss. You plan to force that launch, have it fail spectacularly, and then blame the entire disaster on Vice President Harrison, positioning yourself as the necessary savior. Harrison snapped his head toward Miles, his shock turning to venomous anger. How do I know this? I asked the room, though the question was rhetorical. Because I read your files. I accessed them while I was mopping the server room floor. I clicked a wireless remote I held discreetly in my hand. The giant screen behind me instantly shifted from the company logo to the evidence. The video clip, clear and devastating, showing Miles Albright laughing as he dropped the messy pastry on my head, followed by his arrogant demand to clean it up. A massive, unified sound of disgust and shock filled the auditorium. This, I said, pointing at the screen, is not Genesis Solutions. This is a criminal liability. I turned back to Miles, whose eyes were darting wildly, seeking any means of escape. Your launch has been sandboxed, Mr. Albright. The code did not go live. Your plan to frame your superior has been fully documented, secured, and sent to legal counsel. And your employment at Genesis Solutions ends right now. I nodded to the security detail I had arranged. 2 large men in black suits, true executive security, not the uniformed lobby guards, marched down the aisle with grim efficiency. Security, I continued, my voice unwavering. Please escort Mr. Albright from the building. He does not need to clear his desk. We will mail him his belongings in the most appropriate container. Miles finally found his voice, a whimpering stammer. But it was a joke. Get him out, I commanded. They took him by the arms, moving him swiftly but not violently up the center aisle. As they dragged him away, he twisted his neck, looking back at the woman in the navy suit, desperately seeking some mercy. I raised the microphone one last time, halting his pathetic retreat. And Miles, I called out, ensuring my voice carried to the highest balconies. He stopped, the entire auditorium holding its breath. I finished the cleansing, giving him back his own cruel words with ultimate finality. The doors of the auditorium swung shut behind the struggling figure of the disgraced intern. The antagonist was gone. I had achieved vindication and zero tolerance, and the conflict was closed. The auditorium remained stunned, the silence finally breaking into an uproar of cheering that began, notably, in the back rows where the support staff stood. Miles was gone and the cleansing was complete. I waited until the applause had subsided, then turned back to the room. "This is day one of the new Genesis solutions," I announced, my voice retaining its strength but gaining a softer edge. "We are initiating a full audit of our management culture. If you treat your staff like furniture, update your resume. If you think kindness is a weakness, you are in the wrong company." I looked toward the back, acknowledging the people whose work I had shared. "To the facilities team, to the support staff, and to the assistants," I said, my voice softening with genuine respect. "I see you. And starting today, everyone else will too. Effective immediately," I concluded. "We are raising the base wage for all support staff by 20%, and we are implementing a zero-tolerance policy for disrespect at every level. The integrity that built this company is now its only law." The applause this time was deafening, a roaring wave of relief and vindication that swept through the hall. I walked off the stage, leaving Grace and the legal team to manage the aftermath. The path was clear up. I rode the elevator to the penthouse, the one I hadn't seen in over a month. Stepping into my executive office, the polished wood, the panoramic view of the city, the silence, felt both familiar and profoundly foreign. My assistant, whose eyes were red-rimmed but shining with emotion, walked in an hour later. "Mr. Hart," she said, "there is a bucket outside your door." I smiled, the first genuine unburdened smile in weeks. "Bring it in." She brought in the squeaky yellow mop bucket I had hauled all over the building. It was ugly, dented, and smelled faintly of cheap industrial lemon cleaner and grime, but it was the most beautiful thing in the room. I walked over to the mahogany bar hidden behind a painting. I reached into a drawer and pulled out a bottle of 25-year-old single malt scotch. I poured 2 generous glasses, one for me and one for the empty chair opposite my desk. Picked up my glass and walked toward the window, looking out over the city I had watched while scrubbing floors. The internal conflict that had driven me here, the fear of irrelevance, was gone. I was relevant because I knew the value of every single task, every single person. I had embraced vulnerability and returned with fire. I raised the glass, looking past the city lights, toward the bucket sitting incongruously on my Persian rug. "To the janitors," I whispered, the sentiment of the moment overwhelming in its simplicity. "And to the messes we finally clean up." I drank the scotch, burning smooth and warm, replacing the cold, corrosive rage with the clean satisfaction of a job expertly done. Miles was gone. The rot was excised. I was the founder, returned to the machine, and I now knew the machine floor to ceiling better than anyone. The office finally felt clean.